High-ranking officials leisurely enjoy afternoon tea in their private rooms, while young soldiers drink dirty water from oil barrels on the battlefield. The general would rather feed the gourmet steak from the dining table to the dogs than care about the children on the front lines who can only gnaw on hard bread. Countless passionate young people, brainwashed by politicians, head to the battlefield without hesitation, facing a hail of bullets. Unexpectedly, they quickly turned into cold corpses. As a result, high school students naturally became the primary targets of the politicians.
Veterans.
Weaken inhibitors and aggression and
The same reason at the officers' feet. Before long, the students eagerly headed to the battlefield, dreaming of using their inexperienced hands to march the German army's iron heels into the French capital, Paris. But a few incoming artillery shells quickly wiped the smiles off their faces, as they were poison gas shells fired by the enemy. Paul, on night watch, excitedly told his companions that he saw the first fallen Frenchman and heard that he wasn't dead yet. So he immediately loaded his gun, aimed, and ended the Frenchman's suffering with a shot, not expecting the next moment. Upon hearing the noise, and warned him to keep a low profile if he didn't want to be used as a target. Every time you fire, it's best to move 10 meters to the side. Upon hearing this, Paul immediately got up and did as instructed, but the close brush with death left him unsettled for a long time. At that moment, a flare suddenly pierced the night sky, followed by a barrage of shells. Terrified, the new recruits hurriedly took cover in a makeshift air raid shelter. The confidence that once adorned their faces had long vanished. Some were trembling with fear, while others tried. The next day, when his comrades finally had a moment to spare, they dug him out, only to find the area littered with corpses. It was evident that a fierce battle had taken place the previous night. The veteran, Kate, handed Paul half a piece of bread. After a brief rest, Paul was assigned a new task, to collect the dog tags of the fallen soldiers one by one. Suddenly, he seemed to step on something, and when he lifted his foot, he discovered it was a pair of glasses. His heart sank immediately, as the only person in the unit who wore glasses was his friend, who had enlisted with him. Paul couldn't hold back his tears for the first time as he saw his friend's body lying not far away. At that moment, he finally understood the brutality of war. Even after 18 months, the soldiers at the front had made no progress, but Paul seemed to have become numb. In his free time, he would sneak into nearby villages with his comrades, risking their lives to steal geese from farmers' homes. The ongoing shortage of supplies at the front made even the simplest meal feel more joyful to these low-ranking soldiers than winning a battle. Yet neither side, Germany nor France, showed any intention of stopping the war, even though over 40,000 soldiers were dying each month during this time. I am far less important to these senior executives than a piece of freshly baked bread.
It's unusual.
Batches of new soldiers were sent to the front line. Paul and his comrades were often responsible for meeting them. But this time, when they opened the door of the warehouse, they saw a shocking scene. Because these new soldiers took off their gas masks too early, none of them survived.
Dare you end like this?
Seeing that the situation has turned against them, Germany can only send diplomats to negotiate peace with the French. However, the French, taking advantage of their battlefield advantage, show no respect to the German diplomats, openly insulting them and presenting extremely harsh conditions for the ceasefire. The generals, who are staunch advocates of continuing the fight, simply cannot tolerate this humiliation and decide to confront the French forces head-on.
Capitolian. We must now attack with all our strength.
So in November 1918, Paul's unit received orders to return to the front lines once again. The commander issued the charge order, and everyone, including Paul, immediately jumped out of the trenches, recklessly charging toward the French positions. The enemy's machine guns fired continuously, and the blood mist mixed with gunpowder began to spread through the air. Comrades fell around him, and Paul could only charge forward with a blank expression. Like a soulless war machine, he was lucky enough to finally reach the enemy's position. With a grenade he threw, a gap finally opened in the enemy's defenses. Soon, Paul and the others broke into the enemy's kitchen, and seeing the table full of food, they began to feast. The enemy's rations were clearly much better than theirs, but then, suddenly, the ground began to shake, and swarms of rats started to flee in a panic. Everyone immediately sensed something was wrong and quickly climbed up the trench to take a closer look. Through the mist, a massive steel hand slowly emerged, and ordinary bullets were completely ineffective against it. Those were the first tanks in human history, a terrifying sight they had never seen before. But what puzzled them was that a few of the tanks suddenly came to a stop. German army began to collapse across the board, jumping out of the trenches to flee. But this only made the tank fire even more relentless. Fortunately, the experienced Cat quickly thought of a solution. So he came up with a plan. First, he used a grenade to blow up the tracks of the tank, then stuffed another one into the machine gun's barrel, successfully forcing the enemy inside to come out. But when they turned around, blown several meters away, although his life was not in danger, his ear was temporarily missing. It was at this time that Paul saw a scene that he would never forget in his life, and tried to calm himself down with cold, dirty water. Even though he had been through 2 years of experience, he still couldn't accept such a miserable scene. But at this time, the French army on the opposite side had already rushed up, and he could only continue to flee with his comrades carrying machine gun ammunition. However, he didn't expect that a more desperate experience was still to come. Paul, who was desperately running away, accidentally fell into a mud pit, and the pursuers behind him were getting closer and closer. He could only bury his head in the mud and pray that the passing French soldiers would not notice him. But he was still spotted by a French soldier. Fortunately, distanced himself as much as possible, covering his ears to block out the horrifying sounds that kept coming. This soldier might be a mother's son just like him, Or perhaps he has a beautiful wife waiting for him to come home, just like his fellow veterans. Thinking of this made Paul feel even more guilty, so he crawled back to the French soldier, brushed the dirt off his face, and tried to save his life. But no matter how hard he tried, it was already too late. The sudden feeling of suffocation made Paul unable to breathe for a moment, and he fainted on the French soldier. He did not step on the blood on the ground until late at night. He returned to his camp, stumbling through the mud, but to his surprise, his comrades looked happier than ever. It turned out that the higher-ups had finally realized that this war was unwinnable, and had finally signed their names on the ceasefire agreement. The war was finally coming to an end, and all the soldiers embraced each other, cheering with joy. But Paul didn't feel the happiness he had imagined. He just went to check on his injured comrades. He had lost his right leg on the battlefield, and with it, his hope of survival. So, while everyone was eating, he plunged a fork deep into his own pot. Paul rushed forward to stop them, but no matter how much he cried for help, the soldiers nearby just looked on indifferently, saying they would be going home in a few weeks. War isn't like a pair of socks you can just take off. The stench of it is something they could never wash away. The ceasefire was officially set for November 11th, 1918, at 11 a.m. When Kate heard this news, she felt for a moment that she was deaf, because in just a few hours, she would finally see her beautiful Paul. He would be able to see his beautiful wife. It felt like a scene he couldn't even dream of, leaving him in disbelief. He wanted to have a few more children with his wife and open his own shoe repair shop. Even though only he and Paul were left of their close comrades, he still wanted to enjoy a roast goose feast with Paul to celebrate.
There are still 3 years left.
This time it was Paul's turn to take action. With the experience from last time, Paul successfully found the farmhouse, but just as he was about to make his move, a figure appeared outside the door, stopping him in his tracks.
Hurry up!
Kate waited for a long time but still didn't see her hero Paul, which made her a bit anxious. What was waiting for Paul was the figure of the boy's father, who had come out chasing him with a shotgun.
He walked on.
Just like last time, they were lucky that the farmer's gun didn't hit either of them, and Paul didn't come back empty-handed.
Look at him.
So now I want to talk about something.
That was the sweetest food they had eaten all winter, even if it was just a raw goose egg. After eating, Kate walked alone into the small woods. After running for so long, she wanted to take a moment to relieve herself. But just as she was about to go back to find Paul, she saw a small figure. Hearing the gunshot, Paul stood up and only saw it, but the wound was only a pinky finger thick, and it didn't seem too serious. She smiled and asked Paul to light a cigarette for her. Then the two of them prepared to return to the camp. But on the way back, Kate lost her strength and couldn't respond to Paul anymore. That day Paul didn't know how long he walked before he managed to carry Kate back. He thought that as long as he could get Kate to the doctor, he could save this veteran who had saved him countless times. But the doctor's response left him stunned.
That's his banker?
Directly into stomach black blood vessels.
Paul didn't believe that such a small wound could be healed. Today, he went back to open a shoe repair shop with his wife and have a few more children. He also couldn't believe that just half an hour before the full ceasefire, the general was only trying to achieve one more merit. The soldiers, who were already dreaming of their future lives, gathered together to launch a surprise attack on the positions taken by the French. The successive deaths of his comrades made young Paul feel like a puppet. He couldn't even muster a sad expression anymore. He's been nothing to me with, the Anglo-French coalition, and he never expected that in just 15 minutes, the fighting on the German Western Front would come to a complete stop. At this moment, nothing to me with me, even the French Union did not expect that with only 15 minutes left, the German Western Front soldiers would completely cease operations. At this moment, they would be attacked. Clearly, the Germans' tactics were effective, although there were casualties. They quickly charged into the French positions. Among them, Paul charged the most bravely, saving a new recruit like an experienced soldier, and struggled in the white man's station to carve out a path for himself. During the struggle, he and a French soldier tumbled into the history of the battle team, but at that moment, they both stopped their actions because they were all waiting for these 15 minutes to quickly end. However, a soldier hiding in the corner dealt Paul a fatal blow. The absurdity that followed this fatal blow was the arrival of 11 o'clock. Hearing the shouts from outside the station, Paul climbed out of the battle readiness. The sunlight still couldn't disperse the haze, but it was definitely the sweetest air Paul had breathed in years, perhaps the last episode. And the new recruit saved by Paul was also going to the battlefield for the first time. He received the task of collecting soldiers' name tags. However, when he approached Paul, he couldn't find a name tag. So he took the one from Paul's classmate, using the military blood that flowed through the soldiers in cycles. It was exchanged for silk from the hands of a French woman.